Hey guys, I'm trying to hit 100k before the end of the year, so please subscribe. I think we can get there with your help. It would honestly just mean so much to me personally, so thank you so much. And today I just wanted to read some more scary Reddit stories. I found some really cool ones. There are some new ones that just came out, so let's read some of these. We're gonna start with, I still don't understand what happened to me in the Holly Hills Mall parking garage. I don't know if there is like a specific format to these posts or something, but I'm just going to get straight to it. I'm posting this because, I don't know, maybe someone knows more about this. Maybe someone can help me figure out what happened to me and my best friend in the Holly Hills Mall parking garage. My name is Ethan, and my friend Aaron and I have a bit of a niche hobby. We're urban explorers. Basically, for the uninitiated, that just means we like to explore abandoned man-made structures. My favorites have always been places like water parks and theme parks. Aaron is more into the spooky stuff, like hospitals and such. We can freak ourselves out at times, but for the most part, we never believed in anything other than the corporeal. We've been doing this in our free time for around 10 years now, so we're pretty experienced. We know what to bring, how to avoid being caught by the police or security, and when to get the hell out of a place. Recently, we went to go visit my brother for a few days in Virginia. He had just had a new baby, and I wasn't able to make it down for the birth, so I was making up for it a few months later. He lives in a small town called Holly Hills, about 30 minutes out from Richmond. It's a pretty boring place, but my brother tipped us on to a cool spot to check out near town, an old abandoned mall simply named the Holly Hills Mall. It was built in the early 80s by some wealthy lumber family that wanted to bring more people to the town. Houses needed lumber, and that means more money for them. As you can guess, it didn't really work out. The mall was operational for about 7 years before it shut down in 1987. I know none of this is really important, but this helps to get my thoughts in order, and honestly, the history of the structure is kind of part of the allure for me. Anyway, we decided it would be fun and planned a trip on the last day in town, on the way to the airport for a late flight. We woke up bright and early, packed our bags and supplies into the rental car, and said our goodbyes to my brother, his wife, and their kids. The mall sat right on the edge of town. I thought this was odd, seeing as how they usually build that kind of thing central to town for ease of access, but I didn't think much of it. The mall was surrounded by pretty heavy brush and trees, as well as a tall chain link fence. The entrance was blocked off by a typical dilapidated gate held closed by a simple chain and padlock. Aaron pulled open the gate and I hopped out to apprise the situation. Oddly, the padlock wasn't even locked. Unusual, but not unseen. Sometimes people just stop giving a crap about these old places and don't even check on them anymore. Honestly, it makes us a bit more relaxed in these situations because it usually means no security. I opened the gate and Aaron pulled the car through. The building wasn't the biggest mall we've seen, but it was bigger than we expected. We drove through the deserted parking lot and pulled the car up to the first entrance we saw. We grabbed our supplies and entered the building. The mall exploration itself was pretty uneventful. It was cool to see all of the ads and architecture that seemed frozen in time, like we stepped back into a stale, post-apocalyptic version of the 80s. There was a pretty massive hole in the ceiling where the skylight had given way to snow or the elements or something. The tree that sat in the middle of the courtyard had grown massive and was protruding out of the hole in the ceiling. Aaron does these explorations for fun, but I am a bit of an amateur photographer, so I do it for the photos mostly. I snapped a bunch of what I think would have been amazing photos, but unfortunately, I lost the camera. Well, I didn't lose it per se. I know exactly where it is, but we'll get to that. During the mall exploration, I did have a feeling that we were being watched. Distant sounds of glass crunching underfoot, or a figure just out of the corner of my eye that disappears right when you look in this direction. But I knew this was just my mind playing tricks on me. There were no signs of security and no reason that even if the cops knew someone was in the building, they would even care to come check. At least that was my thoughts on it, so I ignored it. We hung out in the food court for a bit, ate some sandwiches we had packed for lunch, and then decided to make our way to the car. We got to the car, loaded up, and headed out, but on our way to the exit, we noticed a parking garage. It was a 5-story garage from the looks of it, and though it looks pretty uninteresting, for some reason, me and Aaron wanted to check it out. We spent less time in the mall than we thought we would, so I figured, what the hell, we had the time. We drove up to floor 4, did some donuts, and Aaron tried his best to reenact Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift on the way down. I was clenching the entire time, of course, because I didn't want to die, but also it was a rental car. We didn't have the money to pay for any damage done by joyriding in an abandoned mall parking garage. We got back down to floor 0, had a laugh, and started towards the exit, until we noticed the ramp heading down to the lower floor. Aaron pointed pointed out how odd it was that there was a huge parking lot plus a parking garage with 5 floors above ground and seemingly subfloors below ground for a fairly small mall in a small town. So we thought we'd make one more detour to see what was down there. Obviously, we were expecting either darkness or water, and we found the first option, darkness. Aaron turned on the brights and we drove around and found nothing, as expected. What we didn't expect was to see another ramp down to another subfloor. So, of course, we decided to make a game out of it. We both guessed how many subfloors this garage had, and Aaron headed for the ramp. I had guessed too, that this next floor is going to be the bottom. He said 5. He was being stupid, but imagine our surprise when there was yet another subfloor. We both laughed in disbelief when we came around the corner on the 4th subfloor to see a ramp down to the 5th. This is a 10-floor parking garage, including floor 0, for this mid-sized mall in this tiny town. What were they thinking? They really overestimated the draw this place was going to have. Obviously, we headed down for floor 5. At this point, it was dark, like super dark. There was no other light from anywhere other than our headlights. We rounded the corner and were in silent awe to see yet another ramp. We both looked at each other and I think one or both of us said, "What the hell?" Without further discussion, Aaron steered the car down the ramp to the next floor. For the next 6 floors, we drove on in awe and confusion. We were now 11 floors underground. It didn't make sense. Aaron started coming up with theories, getting excited that maybe we'd found the entrance to a secret government base or a sprawling underground doomsday bunker. But he stopped mid-sentence when we saw something we both weren't expecting. A car. It was parked in a spot with its headlights on. As we pulled closer, I decided to roll down the window to see if I could hear anything. Immediately, the unexpected cold from the parking garage filled the car. It was mid-May at the time and was a fairly warm day, so the cold felt out of place. But we were underground, so I choked it up to that. I could hear the sound of our tires against the pavement and the hum of our car's engine. As we pulled up next to the parked car, I could hear that it too was running. The car itself looked like it was an older make, something from the 70s or 80s. Inside, it was seemingly empty. I suggested aloud that perhaps the car belonged to the owner of the property or a security guard who was doing his rounds and that he might be back any minute. But Aaron pointed out that the car was covered in a thick coat of dust, like it had been there for a very long time, but it was running, so I figured it just needed a wash. Aaron did what he does best and convinced me to get out of the car and investigate further. Only after a bunch of protests and suggestions that we just head out, but he persisted. I exited and carefully made my way around the car, looking inside for any sign of life. But inside there was nothing but leather car interior except for the passenger seat where a satchel sat with a thermos resting on top. The keys were in the car and the radio hummed softly with static. Oddly, everything inside the car also seemed to be covered in dust. Aaron urged me to open the door and I decided to give it a try, but of course it was locked. I looked around the lot, only being able to see the door to the stairs and the elevators next to it, illuminated by the headlight of the 2 cars. I hurried back to our car, closed the door, and rolled up the windows. I urged once again for us to make our leave. If there was a security guard lurking around, I didn't want to have to deal with that, especially before our flight in a few hours. Again, Aaron protested. He had to know how many floors this thing had. I can't say I wasn't curious as well, so we left subfloor 11 and headed down further into the depths of the structure. We continued on in silence for 12 more floors before I spoke up. This was insane. It didn't make any sense at this point, and it just felt wrong, dangerous. I was in the middle of expressing this to Aaron when I noticed he had stopped the car and was silently staring ahead. I looked and was astonished to see a horse. A horse just standing there. It had the thing around its nose, the reins or whatever, and it was just standing there. After a moment of staring and confusion, Aaron said something like, "Is that a horse?" And I replied with some kind of grunt of confirmation. The horse had finally turned in our direction, and I'm pretty sure I screamed when I saw the skin hanging off the side of the horse's face, his skull exposed underneath. It was then I saw the blood on the floor, a large streak going from beneath the horse's hooves off into the darkness. I didn't want to know anymore. I wanted to get the hell out of there, and I told Aaron as much. Aaron, against his and my better judgment, wanted to go on. He wanted to know what all this was, but this time I didn't let up. I was louder and more insistent than I've probably ever been with him, and he could see what I think. So he agreed and threw the car in reverse. We backed up and started to back up towards the ground floor. At this point, I decided to try my phone. I had figured I wouldn't get any signal underground, and I was right, but I tried it anyways. Nothing. Again, we drove in silence for a few floors. Aaron finally broke the silence to apologize, but I stopped him short. The floors were numbered. Ever since we started heading down, they were numbered to B1, B2, B3, etc. We were on B23 when we turned around and headed back up, but the sign I was staring at in that moment said B26, 3 floors lower than when we started heading back up. I thought someone was messing with us, but it was all too elaborate of a prank. Still, it was impossible. There's no way we were traveling further down by driving up the ramps. It was physically impossible, but there we were, floor B26. Aaron was just as confused as me, obviously. He got out of the car unannounced and walked over to the sign on the wall. He grabbed it and began to shake it, then stopped and stared, clearly trying to figure it all out. I rolled down my window and called for him to get back in the car. This was followed by another voice repeating my words, not mine, not Aaron. He froze in place as the voice whispered loudly from the darkness, "Get back in the car." Aaron did just that. He closed and locked the doors and rolled up the windows. We agreed that we needed to get the hell out of there. This wasn't fun or adventurous anymore, but we didn't know what to do. We thought we were getting the hell out of there. I remembered that we headed back up on B23 and decided that we should just keep going up. If the numbers keep rising, we should hit ground level by B46. It didn't make sense, but it was the best we had. We continued driving back up. Aaron was driving a bit quicker than before, and just as we thought, the numbers kept rising, which seemingly meant that we were descending. But we held out hope that maybe this was just some weird fluke, maybe it was a joke, maybe we just didn't see those signs on the way down. We traveled in silence again, all the way to floor B35, but it was an uneasy silence. We were afraid at every turn at what we might see, but there was nothing, mostly. There were a few floors with things that I didn't notice, some of them subtle, others glaring. Aaron was focused on driving and didn't seem interested in any of the strangeness we encountered on these floors for the most part. On one floor, I swear I saw a long dining room table with 2 figures sitting at either end, illuminated for only a few seconds by our headlights. Another floor seemingly had a cot in each parking spot. They looked to be occupied by a body. Alive or dead, I don't know. One of the strangest that even caused Aaron to stop the car for a moment was a floor that didn't seem like a parking garage floor at all. It looked like we had pulled into a forest clearing. The pillars of the garbage, now tree trunks, though the concrete ceiling was still visible above. There were plants, grass, bushes, and a pathway leading to what seemed like a small cabin in the distance. The window glowed as if someone were home, and smoke seemingly billowed out of the chimney. The curiosity overcame my fear, and I rolled down the window. The sound of crickets, cicadas, and a cool spring breeze filled the car. Aaron and I looked at each other for a moment before Aaron blurted out, "Nah, screw that," and continued on up the ramp. Finally, after what seemed longer than it should have, we reached B46. Nothing. I started to cry. It was too much. The realization that we were lost underground without any way out was starting to make me feel trapped. We were trapped. It was like I could suddenly feel the weight of every floor above us on me all at once. Aaron kept his cool. He tried to console me. He tried to offer explanations, but there was no explanation. We were in a labyrinth of a parking garage. Aaron started driving with purpose. He turned around and started down again. B47, B48, B49. He stopped the car, turned around again, and started driving back up the ramps. B50, B51, B52. He started to scream. Anger, frustration, confusion, all overflowing in a furious scream. Then in a deafening echo, his scream reverberated around us outside of the car within the parking garage floor. The windows rattled, the car shook, and then shut off. We were now in pitch blackness. The interior of the car was only illuminated by my cell phone, which I had plugged into the car and had been charging. I picked up the phone and turned on the flashlight. Aaron was desperately trying to start the car, but there was nothing, not even a click. Then he screamed, this time in alarm. In front of us, in the darkness, were 2 large eyes staring right at us. I have to express that when I say huge, they were massive, each seemingly the size of the wall. They felt almost flat and unnaturally still, but you could still feel the consciousness behind them. Something was staring right at us. The whites were snow white, and the irises were a icy cold blue. The pupils were dilated and pitch black. I said hell at least 15 times in a row, and Aaron slammed his fists on the steering wheel over and over. A voice, seemingly inside the car, whispered again, "Get back in the car." Aaron's percussive maintenance seemed to have worked because the car started back up without him even turning the key. Whatever was down here seemed to want us to leave, and we wanted to leave too, but we didn't know how. Aaron put the car in reverse and spun it around. I could still see the eyes in the mirror. He sped up the ramp, totally disregarding the numbers. He drove a good 6 or 7 floors before I noticed something standing out in the darkness. Each floor now had a dim light. I was able to calm Aaron down enough to listen to me, and I pointed it out. He stopped on the next floor to see the light in the distance. It was a door. The door to the stairs is illuminated by an emergency light above it. It was our only chance. This was our last option. He drove over and parked the car in front of the stairwell door, illuminating it fully with the headlights of our car. We both bolted out of the car. Aaron flung open the door and we started running up the stairs. After the first flight, we saw the number on the stairs, B57. We were ascending. I started to tear up in excitement. We continued on, faster than before. For 20 floors, we basically ran, energized by the fact that the numbers were going down, which meant we were going up. Around B30, we started to slow down pretty significantly. We were still making our way up, but we were tired. It was then that I looked back for the first time. The stairwell above was lit on each floor, but as we made it up to the next floor, the lights on the previous were turning off. Turning back to head up the stairs, I ran into Aaron, who had stopped in front of me. He was looking up at the top of the next flight of stairs. I looked at what had stopped him. A figure huddled up in the corner at the top of the stairs. They sat with their head buried into their knees, shaking. Their clothes seemed faded, old, and dusty. Maybe a homeless person that had gotten lost. Maybe the driver of the vehicle. I called out gently to the stranger, something along the lines of, "Hello, are you okay? Do you need help?" Aaron scoffed. He said we needed help. Screw this guy. He started up the stairs, but when he got near the top, he hugged the rail, facing the figure the entire time. Slowly, he rounded the corner and called me forward. The stranger didn't move. They just sat there, shaking. Arms wrapped around their legs, face hidden. They were mumbling something, but I couldn't make out what it was. I followed Aaron's lead and carefully passed the person. Same as before, no reaction. We moved on, leaving the figure behind. Aaron led as before, and when I made it to the top of the next flight of stairs, I looked down, startled to see the gaunt face of a man. His cheeks sunken in, his face pale and old, his eyes a piercing pale blue, staring at me, silent, unnaturally still. I didn't say anything. I slowly walked up and rounded the corner. He stared at me the whole time. Again, I ran into Aaron, who was looking up at the top of the next flight of stairs. It was a figure. It looked like the same stranger. I looked down at him on the previous floor, staring at me, and the next floor, face buried in his knees. We traded what the hell looks, but Aaron said, "Just ignore it and keep going. We're too close." So we did. Every floor after, he was there, hiding his face as we approached, staring at us as we left. It was unexplainable, but so was everything else so far. We made our way up, finally reaching B1. This time, there was no man in the corner. I looked back to the previous top step, and he wasn't there either. I felt this was a good sign for some reason. We made our way up to floor 0 and were relieved to see light shining through the cracks of the door. Aaron stopped for only a moment and pushed through the door. He began to laugh. I followed him through, but the cold of the parking garage was back. There, before us, were the bright headlights of a car. Our car, where we left it on floor B58. I had no words. Aaron walked back into the stairwell and fell to the floor, distraught and broken. I told him we can just keep going, we can keep going up, but he wouldn't move. He was tired, defeated. His stoic bravery had finally given way to hopelessness and fear, so I decided to go up to the next floor to check it out. I ran up the stairs and I felt a sudden warmth. I could see light coming through the cracks of the door, but I knew it was different. I knew that it was the sun. I burst through and was blinded by the sudden light of the sun. After the hours and hours in darkness, it took a few moments for my eyes to adjust. We had made it. We were free. We were alive. I ran back to the previous floor to tell Aaron, but he was gone. I ran out through the door into the garage to check in the car, but he was nowhere to be seen. I called for him, shouted at the top of my lungs. My voice echoed through the parking garage, but nothing. I didn't know what to do. I started down the stairs, but stopped cold. I couldn't go back down. I couldn't get lost there again. And then I saw, on the top stair of the floor below, the figure was back. It was Aaron, sitting in the corner, his hands wrapped around his knees, staring at me. I called to him. I ran down to him, but when I got to that stair, he was gone. I looked over the railing down to the next flight down, and there he was again, staring. I couldn't go down anymore. I couldn't. I called to him, pleaded with him to come with me, to get it together and get the hell out of here. But he just stared. I promised him I'd be back. I cried as I turned around and made my way out of the garage. As I left my best friend behind to save myself because I was too scared. I ran from the parking garage across the parking lot, past the gates into the road. Finally, my phone had a signal and I called the police. They came out and I tried my best to explain what happened. I knew it sounded crazy, but I told them the truth. They went and checked the parking garage. They searched the entire thing as well as the mall and the surrounding area. Nothing. In fact, they told me that there were no subfloors in the garage, like I dreamt it all up. How the hell could that even be? I was tested for alcohol and drugs and was fined for trespassing. When my brother arrived to pick me up, I tried my best to explain what happened, but if it couldn't get any weirder, murder, he swore to me he didn't know who Aaron was. They've known each other since we were kids. He's been my best friend for 20 years. But he swore. His wife too, and kids. None of them remembered him. After that, I looked for any evidence of Aaron I could find. All the pictures on my phone were gone. My camera was still in the car, and there was no proof of his existence online, anywhere. I didn't dream him up. I don't do drugs. I don't drink. I don't have any history of mental illness. I didn't make up 20 years of friendship. I've been seeing a therapist and started some meds. It hasn't helped. Nothing has. Something doesn't feel right. This world doesn't feel right. Like I came out of that parking garage into a life I didn't own. I feel like I don't belong here. Every day it becomes more and more clear to me that I have to go back. I don't know what I wanted to get from this post. Maybe just tell my story for people to know I existed. Aaron existed. Maybe to find someone who knows what happened to us. Who knows about the Holly Hills Mall? Who could make any sense of it? Either way, I have to go back. I have to find Aaron. We have to get back in the car. My friend's apartment elevator got stuck. Now he won't stop talking about the smiling man. Look, I know this sounds crazy, but my friend Ben just moved into this old Art Deco apartment building downtown. It's got that vintage charm. Peeling wallpaper with faded floral patterns, whispering forgotten stories, rickety floorboards that groan under every step like the ghosts of restless tenants, and the piece de resistance, a creaky elevator that groans more than it glides. It feels like it's on the verge of giving up the ghost with every ascent, its rusty groans echoing through the dusty halls. Yesterday, Ben texted me in a panic. He got stuck in the elevator between floors. Not a big deal, right? Happens to the best of us. But here's the unsettling part. There's a floor 13 that isn't even on the button panel. Just a blank space where it should be, a void staring back at you, daring you to push the non-existent button. The elevator lurched to a halt, plunging Ben into darkness. The old fluorescent lights flickered and died, leaving him with only the faint glow of his phone screen. He fumbled for the call button, but it was unresponsive. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the groaning of the ancient machinery and the frantic thump-thump of his own heart. It felt like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting. Then the elevator jolted again, and the doors clanged open with a sickening screech. No shiny hallway greeted him, just a gaping maw of inky blackness. The air turned thick and stagnant, the silence broken only by a low, rhythmic dripping sound from somewhere unseen. Ben, ever the curious one and maybe a little foolish, cautiously stepped out, his phone light cutting through the suffocating darkness. The hallway stretched before him, an endless tunnel of peeling wallpaper and chipped linoleum, reeking of mildew and something else, something deeper, something primal. But the most unsettling detail was the faint greenish glow emanating from somewhere down the corridor. It pulsed rhythmically, like a beating heart, beckoning him forward. He texted me, "There's a floor here, but it's not lit. Should I step out?" My heart hammered against my ribs as I typed back, urging him to stay put, wait for help. It took ages for him to respond, and when he finally did, his message was chilling. He smiled. His eyes, no eyes, just black holes. Who smiled? I texted back, a cold dread creeping into my gut. The man on floor 13. He hasn't stopped talking about the smiling man ever since. It's like he's obsessed. He keeps muttering about black eyes and a never-ending smile. A smile that stretched from ear to ear, devoid of warmth, devoid of humanity. The playful, easygoing Ben I know seems to have vanished. I rushed over to his apartment, the silence in the hallway pressing in on me, the creaking floorboards groaning like tortured souls under my feet. Ben answered the door, but it wasn't Ben. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were vacant, his face an emotionless mask. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over in a monotone voice. The smiling man. He waits for you on floor 13. Panic clawed at my throat. I called the police, but when they arrived, they found nothing unusual. No hidden floor, no trace of anything amiss. They think Ben's stressed, overworked, maybe even hallucinating, but I know better. Ben's locked away in his apartment, refusing to come out. He keeps drawing the same thing over and over on scraps of paper. A wide, toothy grin with empty black sockets for eyes. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear a faint, rhythmic dripping sound coming from his apartment. A sound that chills me to the bone. I'm worried sick. Did something happen to him on floor 13? What if the smiling man got to him somehow? And now, the once familiar glint in Ben's eyes seems replaced by a hollow darkness, mirroring the black holes he'd described. Is Ben lost forever to the horrors of floor 13? And the most terrifying part, the blank space where the floor 13 button should be, it's no longer blank. I couldn't remember where I parked, and then it dawned on me I might not ever be able to leave. With my head throbbing and clutching my handbag tightly to my chest, I walked quietly through the indoor parking garage. A massive concrete structure, every space was full, cars of all makes and models squeezed between the lines. I was running late for my niece's 5th birthday. I find family occasions overwhelming. The innocent yet gut-wrenching questions like, when are you gonna meet a nice young man and settle down? And the worst one, have you tried online dating? I just smile and give a rehearsed answer about my career. I continued to hurry through the parking garage. I stopped and scanned the area. I simply couldn't remember where I had parked. My head was still throbbing, pounding to be exact. I never suffered from migraines, but that's the only way to describe it. That or a jackhammer to my temple. I reached into my handbag and took out a small bottle of pills. I swallowed a few pills, no water needed. A slight relief, I continued to look for my car. My car was a Mini, the opposite of all my friends' giant soccer mom SUVs. It suited me, small and understated. When I was young, my grandparents called me their little wallflower. However, unlike most kids, I never blossomed. Where did I park the damn thing? Although no one was nearby, I felt acute embarrassment. Let's be brutally honest. Everyone at some point has forgotten where they've parked, but they usually remember pretty quickly. Okay, let's regroup. My car must be here, otherwise how did I get here? Determined, I searched every row, car by car. I must have seen hundreds, maybe thousands of cars. The parking lot felt endless. The more I searched, the more my head began to pound and pound. It felt like my temples were going to burst. Again, I reached into my handbag and popped some pills. With hindsight, taking this sheer amount of medication should have raised alarm bells or rendered me unconscious, but at the time, I was so focused on getting to my niece's birthday party, it didn't even register. I would never forgive myself if I missed my niece's birthday. It hit me. Would anyone even know if I wasn't there? I wandered around the parking garage aimlessly. This is crazy. My car has to be somewhere. I spotted a tiny security booth by the entrance gates. Great, this surveillance camera will show me exactly where I parked. Soon, this ridiculous ordeal will be behind me and no one will ever know. I looked inside the security booth. There was an empty chair and a grainy old monitor. I waited for a while, but no attendant ever showed up. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I strained to look at the monitor. The parking garage remained perfectly still. The time on the screen was 5:30. It suddenly dawned on me that since I entered the parking garage, no cars have arrived or entered. I had no choice but to leave the parking garage. The security attendant never showed up. As I went outside, my headache roared back. It was relentless. I couldn't shake it. Swirling thoughts raced through my mind. Why did I not see anyone else in the parking garage? And did I actually park here? In the distance, I saw a large shopping mall. Maybe someone in there can help me find my car. After all, it must be where the shoppers park. I entered the bland 1990s shopping mall with 2 levels and a giant escalator in the center. The mall was packed with shoppers of all ages and ethnicities. I was forced to weave through several shoppers. I tried to catch a few of them in the eye, but they never looked back at me. It was like I was invisible, but I was used to that. I walked past a few pointless stores where young store clerks mindlessly stacked shelves. One store that caught my attention was a clock store. It seemed misplaced. The store had every kind of clock imaginable, from grandfather to cuckoo. I noticed that the time on each clock was 5:30. Surely that can't be right. That's the same time as a security monitor. I quickly checked my cell phone, and the time indeed was 5:30. I continued on tentatively. I had this nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. I passed a small drugstore, and my attention was drawn to a young, disheveled, homeless guy with a large rucksack slung over his shoulder. He clutched his back as he picked up a packet of bandages from a shelf. He turned and stared at me. We locked eyes for a little too long. It wasn't sexual. I just knew that I'd seen him before, but I couldn't remember where or when. I broke eye contact and moved on. I didn't have time to hang around. I needed to find someone who could help locate my car. I needed to get to my niece's birthday party. I looked up to the second level and saw the Holy Grail, an information desk. I stepped onto the escalator, but they stopped working, so I was forced to walk up. My legs felt heavy and my head continued to pound. The escalator on the other side worked fine. Shoppers whizzed past me, looking straight ahead, their eyes glazed over. I finally reached the second level. As I stepped off, shoppers whizzed behind me. I rolled my eyes. Did the escalator really just start working? I wasn't surprised based on the day that I was having. Irritated, I marched over to the super large information desk, which would fit perfectly in a 90s sitcom. As I arrived, a young female attendant flicked over the "I'm on break" sign and left. I shouted out, excuse me, but she didn't hear me. I stood there in disbelief, my head pounding harder and harder. I instinctively popped some pills. My headache remained. The relief was becoming less every time. The guilt of missing my niece's birthday preyed upon me, so I impulsively followed the attendant through a back staff door. What's the worst that can happen? I get thrown out by a mall cop and they escort me to my car. I entered a dark corridor with a faint light at the end. I slowly walked along the corridor. My inner monologue was telling me to turn back, but I couldn't stop. I was drawn toward the light, but it became dimmer with every step I took. I heard a sloshing sound. At the end of the corridor, a middle-aged janitor slowly mopped the floor back and forth with dirty water. He didn't look up. up, oblivious to me standing there. Sir, do you know where that young lady went? I meekly asked. He turned his back and kept mopping slowly, back and forth. Losing patience, I raised my voice. I need help to find my car. He moved away and continued to mop a little faster. I snapped, I'm late for my niece's birthday party. He tilted his head and looked at me with black eyes. He spoke with a mouthless face. You shouldn't be here. I ran for my life back along the corridor. As I reached the door, I heard the sloshing sound. I couldn't help but look back. The janitor slowly mopped the floor, back and forth. I raced down the escalator, which was no longer working again. My heart rate matched my pounding temples. A blur of shoppers on the other side of the escalator flashed before my eyes. I headed for the mall exit. I started to hyperventilate. I couldn't breathe, my lungs empty of oxygen. I swayed from side to side. The shoppers continued to browse the stores, and no one stopped to help. I stumbled upon the automatic doors. I needed oxygen. My body was shutting down, but the automatic doors wouldn't open for me. I dropped to my knees, gasping for breath. Shoppers stepped past me, and the automatic doors opened. Unable to breathe, I reached out my hand. A hand grasped my hand and pulled me outside. I desperately sucked in oxygen. I gazed up and saw the young homeless guy looking back at me. Little breaths, he tells me. His presence made me calmer, and I breathed in and out. I know him, but how? I quickly rose to my feet and looked him straight in the eye. Who are you? I bluntly asked. I immediately regretted my tone, but I needed to know. The young homeless guy looked at me with his kind yet sad eyes. I'm Thomas, but everyone calls me Beansy, he replied. I prefer Thomas, but no one calls me Thomas. Why did you help me? I bluntly asked. I regretted my tone once again. Because you're the first person who looked at me today, he replied. We've got that in common, I replied. What's your name? He asked. Penelope, though my parents only called me that when I was naughty, I answered. I was really naughty, so everyone called me Penny. I prefer Penelope. Thomas smiled. Penelope, we've got that in common as well. We shook hands. What brings you here? Thomas asked. It seemed like an innocuous question, but I felt there was more behind it. Does he know why I'm here? But how can he know when I don't even know? Of course, deep down, I knew why I was here, but I couldn't admit it to myself. How could I admit it to a stranger? I hesitated. I'm here to pick up a few things for my niece's birthday party. He studied me for a moment. I quickly changed the subject. I forgot where I parked, I told him. Thomas chuckled and I tapped him on the side. That's not funny. He winced and clutched his lower back. Sorry, I said. I'm fine, he sharply replied. He glanced at his watch. I noticed the time on his watch was 5:30. Before I can say anything, he told me my train's leaving soon. Thank you, Thomas, I said. Will you be okay? He asked. I'm just gonna get an Uber. I'll figure out the car situation another time, I replied. Thomas smiled and walked away. I noticed that every few seconds he clutched his lower back. I watched him till he was out of sight. Will I see him again? Something told me inside he knew the reason why I couldn't remember where I'd parked. Okay, so I need to refocus. I've been here way too long and my niece's birthday party will be over soon. It hit me again. Would anyone even notice that I wasn't there? I took my cell phone from my handbag and tried to book an Uber. There were no drivers available in the area. That's strange. I mean, I know it's not New York, but it's still a town. Undeterred, I Googled for cab agencies and there was only one agency. I went straight through to a male operator. I could hear sirens in the background. The operator asked, "Where's your location?" My head started to pound again as I realized I didn't actually know where I was. I quickly tried to search Google Maps, but I couldn't focus on the screen. It was all blurred. The monotone operator repeated, "Where's your location?" I tried to ask a passerby, but they ignored me and entered the mall. In desperation, I grabbed an elderly lady's arm and asked her, "Where am I?" She turned and her dark eyes pierced through me. I quickly released her arm and she carried on into the mall. The operator repeated the same question, "Where's your location?" I tried to describe the town. "There's this mall." The operator repeated, "Where's your location?" My head felt like it was going to explode. I shouted at the operator, "I can't find my car." The operator gave the same cold response, "Where is your location?" I couldn't answer and I was forced to end the call. I looked around the town. I was lost. I popped some pills and walked quickly through the gray concrete town. I arrived at a small old railway station with 2 empty tracks. I had no idea which direction I needed to go, but it didn't matter. I just needed to leave this place. Something was terribly wrong. On the platform, Thomas sat on a bench with his headphones on. He was singing a country song. I couldn't make out the song, but I remembered thinking that he had a pleasant voice. I must admit, I was relieved to see him, but also concerned he was still waiting. I tentatively sat beside him, leaving plenty of space. Thomas removed his headphones and looked at me with his kind, sad eyes. I noticed there was no song playing on his cell phone. "So what happened to your Uber?" he asked. "No drivers in my area," I replied. I was too embarrassed to mention the cab incident. It's too bad he knows that I couldn't remember where I'd parked. As he was about to put his headphones back in, I asked him, "When's the train supposed to leave?" 5:30, he replied. He checked his watch and it was still 5:30. "It must be broken," he added. I checked my cell phone and the time was 5:30. I stared at him. "It's not just your watch that's broken." We both waited in silence. No trains arrived or left the platform. I couldn't tell you how long we waited. It could have been minutes or hours. It's difficult to judge when time appears to stop. Eventually, Thomas broke the silence. "Where are you going?" "My niece's birthday party," I replied. "How old is she?" he asked. With a glint in my eye, I answered, 5, and I'm her favorite aunt. He quickly followed up with another question. Why are you late for the party? I glared back at him. It's like he already knew but wanted me to clarify. But how does he know? And how does he fit into all of this? Of course, I knew the answer, but it was still too painful to admit. I quickly changed the subject. Where are you going with such a large rucksack? I must admit it did cross my mind that instead of going, he could be escaping. Going home, he replied. It's been too long. I smiled. I'm sure your family will be pleased. He then proceeded to tell me his life story about being the black sheep of the family. I could see the pain and rejection in his eyes. It was on the tip of my tongue to ask him why his parents kicked him out, but everyone deserves a second chance. I hoped that my family would forgive me for missing my niece's birthday party. By now, I realized I wasn't going to make it. My only focus now was to leave this town. Thomas looked me in the eye and told me the real reason he was going back. I need a good bath. He jokingly smelled under his armpits. We both chuckled and went back to staring at the empty track. I popped some pills and Thomas looked at me. What? I said defensively. He replied, you've been taking pills non-stop since I met you. It was now dusk and clearly no trains were ever coming. Together we headed back into town. In the background, the unnerving sound of sirens. Thomas winced and clutched his bag. Blood seeped through his jacket. You're bleeding, I remarked. He quickly replied, just a scratch. I wasn't convinced. Thomas dropped back, struggling to lift his large rucksack. Would you like some help? I asked. He didn't answer and picked up the pace. We arrived at the shopping mall and Thomas stepped towards the automatic doors. I stopped, afraid to go inside. I had a strange feeling that once inside, I might never be allowed to leave. I came over all woozy. Thomas caught me as I fell. When was the last time you ate something? He asked. Inside the mall, nothing had changed. Shoppers continued to mindlessly browse the stores. We entered a 60s retro diner where customers sat in silence across from each other in booths. It was like they had nothing to say. We queued at the counter and gave our order to a cashier who barely acknowledged us. I kept the order simple. Coffee and cake, one of life's simple pleasures. Thomas just ordered a coffee. I guess he lost his appetite. He was starting to look weaker. The cashier rang up his bill. Thomas looked down. I didn't mind paying, so I reached into my handbag and to my surprise, I lifted out a wad of cash. Why the hell do I have cash? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Thomas staring at the cash. We sat opposite each other in a booth. Do you get the feeling these people don't know we're here? I asked. Thomas gave a response I wasn't expecting. Can you remember the faces of everyone you met? I felt guilty. He's right. We never stopped to take the time to get to know one another. Even our close friends and family don't truly know who we are. My head started to pound and instinctively I popped some pills. We waited for what could have been seconds, minutes, or hours. The diner owner, a large, jovial man in his 60s wearing an apron, walked over and put down our order. He spoke with a gentle southern drawl, but like everyone else here, he couldn't look us in the eye. Ma'am, latte with a slice of cake, he said. And sir, one Americano. I stared down at the slice of pink birthday cake. The diner owner casually left. Starving, I started to devour the pink birthday cake, but it was chalky and tasteless. Thomas sipped his black coffee, which became slick like oil. He recoiled in disgust. At that moment, every customer stood up and left. The diner owner returned to our booth. Mall's closing, he told us. I need to speak to someone about my car, I remarked. Better eat and drink up, he added. It was like he was on autopilot. He then told us something chilling in his gentle southern drawl. You don't want to be here when it's dark. It's different when it's dark. The diner owner casually left. Thomas and I exchanged a look of deep concern. We exited the mall diner, still hungry and thirsty. The shoppers were leaving the mall in droves. I heard the familiar, disturbing sloshing sound. Dozens of janitors were mopping the floor back and forth. They looked up with their black eyes and circled toward us, mopping faster and faster. We ran through the mall towards the exit. You shouldn't be here, they chanted with their mouthless faces. It dawned on me. They weren't chasing us. They were warning us. We sprinted to the automatic doors which were closing. I knew they wouldn't reopen and we would be trapped inside forever. As the mall's lights went off, we scraped through the automatic doors. Outside was now pitch black. Sirens roared in the background. Maniacal laughter echoed through the streets. I turned to Thomas. We're getting out of here. My car has to be in the parking garage. With only the moonlight to guide us, we headed toward the parking garage. Clutching his lower back, Thomas could barely lift up his rucksack, but still wouldn't allow me to help. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. Is there something in the bag he doesn't want me to see? The maniacal laughter grew louder and louder. I glanced behind to see if we were being followed, and to my horror, the moonlight shapeshifted into demon silhouettes. This must be a hallucination. It can't be real. I looked behind again, and the demon silhouettes grew larger and more defined. We arrived at the parking garage. Once inside the parking garage, the roaring sirens and the maniacal laughter stopped. The demon silhouettes didn't follow us in. Are they not allowed in here? Are there rules? The parking garage was still packed full of cars. What car do you drive? Thomas asked. I struggled to answer him. I couldn't couldn't remember. My headache had been getting progressively worse. It was as if someone stabbed a screwdriver through my temples. I popped some pills and closed my eyes. I flashed back to earlier when I drove my Mini into the parking garage. Back to reality, I shouted out, "Mini!" We scanned the parking garage and every single car was now a Mini. I stared at the rows upon rows of Minis in sheer disbelief. "Use your fob," Thomas told me. I fumbled to find my fob in my handbag and noticed the wad of cash. Why do I have that amount of money? I pressed my fob and every single car flashed open. Suddenly, a wave of shoppers and staff from the mall entered the parking garage. They simultaneously got into their Minis and drove off. One of the Minis drove straight at us and I yanked Thomas and myself behind a concrete pillar. I heard slow, loud footsteps. I peered from behind the pillar and saw the diner owner walking toward the last remaining Mini. I jumped out from behind the pillar. "That's my car." He spoke in his gentle southern drawl. "You don't want to be here when it's dark. It's different when it's dark." He gets into the car and closes the door. "Please take us with you," I cried out. "We need to leave this place." The diner owner casually reversed out of the space. I desperately pounded on the windshield. "Help us, help us." The diner owner drove off and I was forced to step away. My head was on the verge of exploding. I chugged back the bottle of pills. The parking garage spun around me. I snapped out of my trance and looked over at Thomas, who was lying in a pool of his own blood. I removed his blood-soaked bandage and to my shock saw a large gaping hole from his back to his stomach. "You've been shot," I exclaimed. His eyes glazed over. He whispered, "I know." I wrapped my t-shirt tightly around his wound and called for an ambulance. The monotone operator asked, "Where's your location?" I was forced to end the call. I realized no one was coming to save us. I turned to Thomas, who struggled to keep his eyes open. "We're leaving this god-forsaken town." With my arm around his waist, we exited the parking garage. Thomas limply dragged his rucksack along the ground. He refused to leave it behind. Outside, I nervously scanned right and left. There was no sign of the demon silhouettes. Maybe it was just a hallucination from my headaches. I decided to turn left. It didn't matter as long as we could escape to another town and get help. I struggled to pull Thomas along, who was getting progressively weaker. He still clasped onto his rucksack like his life depended on it. Blood dripped from his bullet wound, creating a trail. Sirens raged in the background. The demon silhouettes shapeshifted from the moonlight and laughing maniacally followed us. I tried to move faster, but the demon silhouettes got closer. "Let me go," Thomas gasped. "We're in this together," I told him. "We're gonna leave together." We were forced to hide in an alleyway. At the end of the alleyway, I saw a bright shining light. I had a sudden awakening. We just needed to pass the light. It's our only chance to leave this town. A jarring pain seared through my head. I collapsed Thomas and myself hard to the ground. We both lay there, incapacitated. The demon silhouettes towered above us like skyscrapers. I desperately reached into my handbag for my bottle of pills, but it was empty. Thomas strained and reached into his rucksack. He took out another bottle of pills and passed them to me. I instinctively paid him with the wad of cash. We locked eyes, and at the precise moment, I knew who he was, and he knew who I was. I flashed back to earlier when I walked quickly through the streets. I clutched my handbag tightly to my chest as I passed a large, hooded gang who laughed at me. I spotted a young homeless guy in a side alleyway. I nervously approached him and asked if he had any drugs. It wasn't the first time I'd searched the streets for drugs. I was ashamed, but the humiliation of attending my niece's birthday party single was too much to handle. I just had to take the edge off. I had no choice but to get high. Thomas seemed unsure, but reached into his rucksack and handed me a bottle of pills. I took out the wad of cash from my handbag. Back in the strange town, the demon silhouettes engulfed and pulled me away. I tried to fight back, but I stood no chance. They were too powerful. With his final surge of energy, Thomas lunged off the ground and pulled me back. I flashed back to the hooded gang robbing me of my cash. They grabbed my neck from behind and were choking me. I desperately tried to fight them off, punching, kicking, clawing, but they were too strong. Thomas lunged at them and pulled me away. Thud. A hooded gang member shot Thomas in the back, who collapsed to the ground. I saw his eyes roll back. With sirens in the background, the hooded gang threw me to the ground and ran away. Crack. My head hit the concrete. Everything went dark. Back in the strange town, the demon silhouettes now had us both. They pulled us further away from the light into darkness. Thomas was too weak to fight back. His eyes glazed over, but I refused to give up and pulled us back towards the light. I screamed out, "We need to leave this town." I woke up being rushed on a gurney by EMTs into the ICU. I passed a janitor with his eyes down, mopping the floor back and forth. I dipped in and out of consciousness. The doctors checked under my eyes with a light and called out my name, Penelope. I caught a glimpse in the neighboring room of doctors performing emergency CPR on Thomas. Everything went dark again. Back in the strange town, the bright light exploded toward me like a supernova. I reached out my hand, which was absorbed by the light. I was ready to pass through. I looked behind at the demon silhouettes dragging Thomas out of the alleyway. What would be his fate? Would he be destined to live for eternity like the other soulless entities here? The light now absorbed half my body, but I couldn't couldn't leave him. I must save my friend. So I pulled away from the light and entered the darkness. With my head about to erupt and blood pouring out of my ears, I chased after the demon silhouette, who scraped Thomas along the ground back toward the mall. Thomas's eyes turned from white to black, but I refused for him to become another mindless drone and grabbed his rucksack that he still clung onto, a symbol of him going home to his family. I pulled with all my might, but the demon silhouettes wouldn't release him. The light from the alleyway became faint. I gritted my teeth and channeled every negative emotion from feeling unloved, unworthy, and embarrassed of who I am. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "This little wallflower deserves happiness." And with one final burst of energy, I ripped us away from the demon silhouettes into the light. My eyes opened wildly and I found myself lying in a hospital bed. I spoke to a kind nurse. "What happened?" I asked. "You were found unconscious in an alleyway," she replied. "What about the young guy with the rucksack?" I asked. She hesitated to answer. I presumed it had something to do with patient confidentiality. I looked at her with desperate eyes. "Please, I need to know if Thomas is alive." The nurse was taken aback that I knew his name. She leaned in close and told me, "He's alive, but it was touch and go. At one point, he was pronounced clinically dead." I took a long, deep breath. While recovering from my head trauma, I regularly took trips to see Thomas. He was always asleep and hooked up to machines. A few weeks later, I was declared fit to leave, but I didn't want to leave. I needed to speak to Thomas. I needed to find out whether the strange town was real or just a dark part of my subconscious. If we were there and the events actually happened, there would be proof of an alternate reality. Some would call it purgatory. I wasn't sure which answer I was looking for. Both terrified me. Only Thomas could provide the answer. So every day, for over a year, I waited on a bench outside the hospital for him to leave. I was banned from going inside, so I had no choice. One nondescript day, Thomas walked out of the hospital with his rucksack slung over his shoulder. He was slimmer than I remembered, but looked fresh and healthy. Although I'd longed for this moment, I decided to let him pass by. The strange town was my burden to carry, and I wanted Thomas to be free and to move on with his life. Thomas continued to walk away. He stopped and turned to look at me. We locked eyes, and I knew at that moment what happened to us was real. There was an unbreakable bond. We had both experienced the strange town. Together, we left the hospital and walked along a busy street. We passed people grinding through their everyday lives, oblivious to the truth. Thomas and I don't say anything to each other. We don't need to. We know what happened. Up ahead, there's a street diner. Thomas turned to me. "Shall we get a coffee?" "It can't be worse than last time," I quipped. Inside the diner, we sat across from each other in a booth. The diner owner, a middle-aged, slim Italian-American woman, put down our coffee and cheesecake. She spoke with a thick Brooklyn accent. "Better eat and drink up." Thomas and I looked at each other. "You don't want to be here when it's dark. It's different when it's dark." Has anyone ever tried the 13th floor ritual? I've always been drawn to the darker corners of the internet. Not the dark web, just obscure websites and blogs with next to no users. That's how I stumbled across the 13th floor ritual. It was just a post on an obscure forum, but it promised an experience beyond anything imaginable. A glimpse into a world that defied explanation, with the promise of good fortune for those who follow the ritual steps correctly. I've archived the post, and while I won't link it here this time, it reads as followed. Greetings. Below you will find instructions on how to perform the 13th floor ritual. They say if you perform the ritual correctly, you'll have good fortune, but at a cost. Some claim they've seen the other side, while others have vanished without a trace. So who's brave enough to try? Step 1. Find a building with at least 13 floors. It must have an elevator that can access all floors without restrictions. Step 2. Begin the ritual at 1 in the morning. This is 1 hour past midnight, also known as the true 13th hour. Number 3. Enter the elevator alone. If anyone else gets on, you must wait and start over. Step 4. Press the buttons in ascending order, starting with 1 all the way through 13, stopping on each floor. You must not proceed if the elevator stops on any floor where you did not press a button. When you reach the 13th floor, the doors will open to a hallway that doesn't exist in our realm. You may see figures in the distance. Do not, for any reason, interact with them or show fear. Step 6. Leave an object of personal significance in the hallway. The greater the significance, the greater your fortune. This is your offering. Step 7. Return to the elevator and do not for any reason turn around. Press the button for the first floor. If the elevator begins ascending instead, immediately press any other floor's button to disrupt the ascent. Exit the building. Step 8. Exit the building immediately after reaching the first floor. Do not look back. Do not go back, ever. If you've made it past the final step, congratulations. You may now begin to experience good fortune. You can thank me later. Regards, M. After reading this, I called up my buddy, who I'll refer to as Steve in this story for the sake of anonymity. Steve and I go way back, and both of us have enjoyed trying out outlandish internet ceremonies in order to document the results. It's a sort of hobby we've shared since middle school. Everything we had ever done before this had, unsurprisingly, ended in disappointing results, which is why it was no surprise when Steve initially declined my invitation to join me on this particular excursion. Nah man, I don't think so. I mean, thanks for the offer, but Kristen's mom's visiting from Vermont this weekend and she needs me to help move some furniture to get her apartment ready. He told me, plus the post you sent says that only one person is allowed to perform the ritual, and it's not like anything ever happens anyway. Of course nothing happens, I chuckled in reply, but the fun is in the experience. Come on man, there's no way I'm going to an old building at night by myself. You can just use the stairs to meet me at each floor. I don't know man, that furniture, nobody moves furniture at night, Steve. You just don't want Kristen's mom to find out about your little hobby, isn't that it? Maybe, Steve sighed. I could hear the hesitation in his voice. I knew I had him. Come on Steve, we'll both be going off to college in the fall. We gotta have at least one adventure before then. Man, Kristen literally turns you into a scaredy cat. There is a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Steve relented. Alright, fine, but if we get caught, I'm telling the police you're holding me hostage. Deal, I said with a grin. I'll pick you up at 11 tonight. We set out to find a building tall enough, old enough, and most importantly, abandoned enough to perform the ritual. It took longer than we expected, and it was already 12:40 when we settled on what building to use. After a bit of back and forth between me and Steve, we decided on the Markham building. It was an old, worn-out, 18-floor structure originally built in the 1930s when Art Deco architecture was still a thing. It's mostly unused nowadays, save for the first floor, which I believe operates as an insurance office during the morning hours, though don't quote me on that. The rest of the building hasn't been leased out since the 90s. We parked a few blocks away from the Markham building to avoid drawing any unwanted attention. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sounds being the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As we approached the building, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The Markham building loomed over us. I imagined it must have been one of the tallest, grandest buildings in the area during its time, but it was now marred by years of neglect and decay. Steve and I had anticipated that entering the building might pose a bit of a challenge, as the first floor was at least still in partial use, but this hadn't stopped us from getting into other similar locations in the past, though this would be the biggest building we've ever forced our way into. We could see through the glass doors of the entrance that the first floor was still illuminated, as if someone might be inside. I pushed through gently on the door, and to our surprise, it gave easily, swinging open with no effort at all. Steve and I glanced at each other in a mixture of surprise, excitement, and nervousness. Steve quickly put his lockpicking tools back into his front pocket. We'd been kind of worried about being seen by any cameras inside, but now that the door hadn't been locked, we were no longer concerned with being charged with unlawful entry, as for all we knew, the building was still open. In fact, we were now more concerned about running into an employee who might question us and what we were up to. Cautiously, we made our way through the entrance, past the empty receptionist's desk, and into the main lobby. It was not fancy. In fact, it was their dingy and also appeared not to have seen any improvements made to it since the mid-80s when the building had been last renovated. What stood out in contrast to this, however, was the large, shiny, new silver elevator located in the far side of the room. Half expecting someone to come up from behind, we hastily made our way over to the elevator's metallic doors. "Why is it so new?" asked Steve, holding the flashlight that I had given him, though it was currently pointless. "I don't know," I shrugged. "I guess Wikipedia was wrong, and this place has been renovated pretty recently. Hell, maybe even the other floors aren't abandoned either." Steve didn't reply, but the uneasiness in his face was very easy for me to read. The instructions were clear. At 1 hour past midnight, I was to enter the elevator alone, visit floors in a specific order, and never, under any circumstances, look back once the elevator reached the 13th floor. "Remember, you have to take the stairs and meet me on each floor," I reminded Steve. Yeah, I got it," he replied, rolling his eyes. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the first floor. As the doors closed, I could hear the faint sound of Steve's footsteps as he made his way to the stairwell. The elevator began its ascent, and as it did so, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I found myself glancing nervously at the mirror, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking behind me. But, of course, there was nothing. Just my own rather pale reflection staring back at me. When the doors finally opened on the first floor, I was relieved to see Steve waiting for me. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "Yeah, just feeling a bit creeped out in there," I admitted. "Let's keep going." I pressed the button for the second floor. The doors closed, and the elevator continued its journey. We repeated this process, following the sequence of buttons outlined in the ritual. Each time the elevator stopped, I was greeted by Steve. He was always able to get to the next floor ahead of me, as the elevator took around an extra 20 seconds extra in the process of opening and closing its doors. I was also careful to never step out or for him to step in. I didn't want to do anything that could potentially force us to start over. We continued floor by floor until I reached the 12th floor. As the doors opened, I fully expected Steve to be there, already waiting for me, as he had been in all the other floors, but there was nobody there, just a dark, abandoned office hallway. I didn't want to admit it to myself at the time, but I was scared. "Steve?" I called out softly, and as I did so, that feeling of being being watched intensified. I could hear my heart beating loudly in my ears, and for a moment, that prevented me from hearing something else. Eventually, I breathed a sigh of relief when I realized that I could hear Steve's footsteps echoing in the stairwell. He must have already started heading up to the 13th floor. I took a deep breath and pressed the button for the 13th floor. The elevator doors closed with a soft thud, and despite knowing deep down that this ritual was just a prank post by some internet goof, I felt a shiver run down my spine. To me, the ascent felt slower this time, like the elevator itself was reluctant to reach its destination. When the doors finally opened, I was greeted by pitch blackness. The other floors had been dark, sure, but even then there had been some light coming through the large glass windows that lined some of the walls. My heart was beating as quickly as I flicked on my flashlight to see what was ahead of me. Even though I was scared, part of me felt disappointed when all I saw was a hallway that looked completely normal for an abandoned building. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, and the floor was covered in a worn-out carpet. There were many desk chairs stacked on top of one another in a corner, and a trash bin that appeared to be filled with paper, but otherwise there was little else to see in the hallway. It was eerily quiet, and the only sound was a faint hum of the elevator behind me. I stepped out of the elevator, my heart resuming a more slowed and steady beat. I glanced around, again expecting to see Steve waiting for me, but the hallway was empty. I took a few cautious steps forward, my eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. The air felt heavy, and there was still that lingering, unshakable feeling that something was there, watching me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my grandfather's old watch. It had been given to me as a birthday gift from him 3 days before he was killed in a car accident. I had brought it with me as my offering, hoping that its significance would be enough to satisfy whatever forces were behind the granting of good luck that the forum poster had alluded to. I placed the watch on the floor beside the trash bin. I'd come back to get it next weekend, I told myself. As I turned to head back to the elevator, I froze dead in my tracks. It was gone. The elevator was gone. I know this sounds insane, and believe me, that's exactly how I felt in that moment, but the elevator is gone. In its place was a blank wall, as if the elevator had never existed. Panic surged through me, and I spun around, searching for any sign of an exit. The hallway stretched out before me, seemingly endless and devoid of any exits or windows. "Steve?" I called out, my voice echoing down the empty hallway. There was no response. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Steve," I shouted, louder this time. Still no response. I hesitated, trying to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I needed to think logically to come up with a plan. If the elevator was gone, then my only option was to find another way out, and that meant exploring the rest of the 13th floor. I hated the idea of that, but what else could I do? I continued down the hallway. My flashlight was quite literally the only source of light. The air grew colder with each step, and the silence was, for lack of a better word, oppressive, as if it were trying to smother me. I called out for Steve again, but there was no reply, just the echo of my own voice bouncing off the walls. I felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that I was not alone. As I ventured further, the hallway began to change. The faded wallpaper peeled away to reveal old, cracked plaster. The carpet disintegrated under my feet, leaving a trail of dust and debris. The chairs that had formerly been stacked neatly were now strewn all across the floor, and then I saw them, the figures. They were distant at first, pretty much just shadows at the edge of my flashlight's reach, but as I moved closer, they became clearer. They were tall, impossibly thin, and incredibly still. I remembered the warning from the post: do not interact with them or show fear. But how could I not be afraid? They were like nothing I had ever seen, and their presence fills me with an instinctual terror. I have never felt that level of intense dread before in my life. I don't even know how to accurately describe it. Suddenly I heard a cry. It was desperate and pleading, and the voice was all too familiar. Help me. It was Steve's voice, coming from somewhere ahead. Without thinking, I started running towards the figures and the sound of Steve's voice. I knew I was breaking the rules of the ritual, but I didn't care. Steve was my friend and he needed me. As I approached the figures, they turned to face me. Their eye sockets seemed to be empty voids, and their toothless mouths were wide open, almost as if they were screaming. But they made no sound at all. I reached out to them, begging for help. I don't know why I did that. It seemed so stupid now, but I was desperate, and probably in some state of shock, to be honest. They did not respond. They simply stood there, watching me as Steve's cries grew fainter and fainter until they were gone entirely. Then I was alone again, surrounded by the figures. I felt a sudden sharp pain in my side, and I realized I had injured myself somehow. It felt like I had hurt myself falling, but I know that I hadn't done that. I sank to the ground in agony for a moment as the figures watched me silently. I could feel my heartbeat pulsing in my head, but I was somehow able to muster the strength to struggle to my feet, despite the pain searing through me. I had to get back to the elevator. I had to escape this nightmare. I stumbled back the way I had come. The figures did not interfere with me. In fact, they seemingly parted to let me pass. When I reached the spot where the elevator should have been, to my amazement, it was there, as if it had never left. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the button for the first floor and collapsed inside as the doors closed. Slumping against the wall, my energy energy spent. That's when I felt the elevator begin to ascend. Panic gripped me once again. This wasn't right. The building only had 18 floors, yet it was already past floor 30 and was still climbing and accelerating. I struggled to sit up and reach for the keypad. My vision blurred, my fingers fumbled, but I managed to press another button. I think it was floor 1, but I could barely see, so I'm not even sure. The lift jolted and then began its descent. When the elevator finally stopped, I braced myself for what I might find. But when the doors opened, I saw that I was on the first floor, with everything as it had been before, except now the lights were off. Gasping for air, I crawled out of the elevator, my body screaming in protest. I had to get outside to find help, but I was so weak and tired that I didn't even think I could make it. I pushed open the glass door to escape, and by some miracle, a car drove by and saw me. A stranger rushed to my side, their voice echoing distantly as they called for help. I awoke the next morning in the hospital. The sunlight beaming into the sterile white room was a welcome sight after the darkness of the Markham building. I sat up, feeling a sharp pain in my side. I glanced around the room, wondered what happened. The events of last night felt so distant that I began to believe they must have been a feverish dream. Perhaps I'd gotten into a car accident. Just as I had started to convince myself of this narrative, I noticed it. My grandfather's watch, sitting on the table beside my bed, its hands frozen at 1 o'clock, the true 13th hour. I felt the pit of my stomach drop. Was it really all real? How did the watch get here? What had happened to Steve? I had to find out. Desperate for answers, I returned to the forum where I had found the ritual. I posted about my experiences, hoping someone could help me. The responses, what few there were a mix of skepticism and concern. But one message stood out. It was from a user named M, the same person who had posted the ritual. "Congratulations," the message read. "You've seen the other side. But remember, good fortune comes at a cost. The figures you saw are now aware of you, and they will not rest until they have what they want. Be careful, and whatever you do not perform the ritual again." I realized then, with a sinking feeling, that Steve must have been the object of importance that I left from the 13th floor. I had meant to leave my grandfather's watch, but somehow I had accidentally left Steve behind. So that's where I'm at right now. I don't expect any of you to believe me, obviously. Hell, I don't even know if I completely believe it myself. I've tried calling Steve hundreds of times to no avail. Kristen, Steve's girlfriend, keeps texting me, asking where he is. I don't know how to break the story to her. I do know, though, that I have to go back to that building. I have to perform the ritual again. I can't leave Steve there. I got him into this mess, and I have to be the one to get him out. The doctors say I might have to stay here overnight at the very least, but I can't wait that long. I'm just waiting for 11 o'clock tonight when I can sneak out of here with just enough time to get back to the Markham building by 1. I know this is just a forum to post stories that are preventing you from getting any sleep, but if any of you have any genuine advice on what to do or how to get help, please let me know as soon as you can. I only have 13 hours left before I have to go.